Last year, I collaborated with the UN in a visual story to present their emissions gap report, which, as you all know, I guess, tells you what we should be. It's the difference between what we should be doing and what we're actually doing to prevent dangerous levels of climate change. And one of the things that it focuses on is greenhouse gas emissions. One of our main graphics was this big chart with all the greenhouse gas emissions of all the countries. And that comparison was not going to happen in just one chart. So we transitioned that into this map of these little cells with squiggly lines on them to see the regional patterns. But obviously, not everybody brings the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So we retransitioned that chart into this cartogram, and we colored it based on they are meeting or not meeting their commitments. Breaking a complicated data set into easy-to-digest chunks is a great way, and guiding people through it is a great way of telling stories. But you can turn these presentations into something epic if we connect with people, if we reframe that data into something that people can understand more tangibly, which is what we didn't have here. We can understand those squiggly lines, but we cannot connect with them. 2 years ago, I collaborated with the Washington Post on a story trying to debunk the arguments that deniers of the gender pay gap throw around every time the issue comes along. And as the hook for the story, we translated that data, that 80%, the 20% difference between men and women, into a year, and 80% of the year falls around October, and that indicated to us when we should be publishing this story. And we had that. It's not a new idea. In Iceland in 1975, they had this women day off, and they walked out at 2 p.m., which was, instead of translated into a year, translated into a day, and they've been doing it not every year, but every few years. And we did that. We translated that for every profession in the US Census at the top of the story. That's what I do. I use data and charts and interactives and metaphors to make data tangible for people, so they can connect to that data. I turn it into something more visceral and more tangible. I was at the Guardian, and we had this. We found this huge data set of every single house purchase in London and in England and Wales since 1995. And that by itself showed us absolutely nothing. But when we framed it in a way we could turn it into something relevant for you, it completely changed the game. You could enter your salary, and all of a sudden, this visualization was about you, was about if you could afford where your parents live, if you could afford where you live now, if you should have bought your apartment 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And sometimes I do it through creative interfaces. I try to make people touch the data somehow and get that data to change. One of the biggest stories of 2015 was how a drop in China's imports could affect countries that depend on the Chinese economy. And we did a lot of number crunching, and we did a lot of prototyping. This is the great thing about having a multidisciplinary team. We had a great developer, Carlos Zaboni, and the visual editor in charge of the story, Sean Clark, who's a data journalist, create this prototype because they were arguing about things over a spreadsheet. And then Carlos said, hold on, let's try to do a prototype. But when it came time to communicate it, this wasn't enough. So what we did was to build this sort of new interface in which people could drag China down and see how that affected the countries that depended on their economy. And I obsessed, but as you can imagine, all those things happen in the first 10 seconds of the story. I obsess about those 10 first seconds of a story. This is a project we did on violence against women. And as you can see in this map of the story, the biggest chunk is at that top. We took data from a survey, the biggest survey that has been done in Catalonia about violence against women. And we turn it from that percentage to the real number of people that are affected. And we build this wall that you cannot skip to get to the story. So I think that we need to keep in mind when we communicate things that it's always about, it's not about the abstract numbers, it's always about the people behind them. And like little side note, I have a 5-year-old that when I was working on this slide, I asked him completely randomly, so Roy, what is the most important thing? This or this? I showed him both this or this. And he said, Daddy, of course, this. And I was like, why? Because it's people. He didn't understand the context. He had absolutely no idea what I was talking about, but he realized that he should care more about little people. I think that using this data-driven, evidence-based sort of storytelling is the best tool that we have to actually change the world and have impact with our work. Thank you.